Welcome to Dates and Dead Guys. In the spirit of the holiday, I'm going to tell you a Christmas story. It's one of my favorites. It's about that time, during a blizzard, that George Washington took a bunch of ragtag, backcountry, near-naked patriots across a freezing river in the dead of night, just to march another 9 miles to attack some German assholes as they slept. You know, for Christmas. But before we get started here, if you are new to the channel, I research historical topics I find interesting and explain them in a way that I would to my friends. I try to release 2 videos a month, so I hope you come back for more content. If it is your kind of thing, subscribe and leave a like or share, and hopefully we can keep building this thing. This story takes place in late 1776, just months after George Washington and the Continental Army are forced to leave New York after General Howe and the British Army thoroughly embarrassed them. Washington retreated through New Jersey before making camp on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware. I cannot overstate how poorly things have been going for the Americans. It's almost as if a bunch of farmers are outmatched by professional soldiers. I don't want to make it sound like the Americans hadn't faced any real opposition up until this point in the war, but when Howe showed up in New York, it was very much a daddy's home type situation, and mommy had been sending him messages about how bad the Americans were being. But instead of putting coal in your stocking for you to find, he instead beat you with it like a prison sock full of batteries. A lot of it is not even Washington's fault. I'm not kidding when I say the Continentals are not trained. In New York, it almost didn't matter what Washington did. They would just retreat when they were shot at. There's this wonderful shot in my mind of Washington on horseback urging his soldiers to fight as they retreated all around him. Fires blazing, rifle shots cracking, and artillery pounding all around him. He throws his hat to the ground in frustration, looks to the sky, and says the iconic line, "Are these the men to which I am to defend America?" So things aren't going well. And a few months later, it's December in Pennsylvania and things haven't improved. In fact, it's worse. Even though the army had recently been reinforced, Washington has around 6,000 fighting-ready men. These enlistments are short, and within a few months, if people don't re-enlist in the army, there is going to be only a fraction of those people remaining. And why would you re-enlist? Many aren't even waiting that long. Desertion is common, and who could blame the Americans? You don't want to die. The Continental Congress makes a lot of promises, but they can't even keep you fed and in quality clothes. And even if the British don't kill you, disease and cold might. And that says nothing of leadership. I love Washington. My dog is literally named George, but results matter and he is not getting them. If things don't turn around quickly, he very well might be removed from his position, and there are guys like Horatio Gates waiting in the wings for that job. Luckily, or not, depending on how you want to look at it, winter meant a bit of a break in the action. War is hard, sad, dreary stuff that people don't want to make worse by doing it in terrible weather. This was pretty common in the 18th century. War was waged in seasonal campaigns. As such, the British and General Howe have set up camp in New York for the winter. Some British leaders have even gone as far as England to get away for a few months. The Americans don't have that luxury, and they are stuck in the cold. But doesn't that leave the Americans unattended? Well, no. The British themselves don't have to keep a close eye on Washington. There are ways to outsource that. The British hired German mercenaries called Hessians to keep hold of outposts in New Jersey like Trenton, a city located across the Delaware from where Washington and the Continental Army were. I'm probably taking too long to get this far, but just to recap, things look bleak for the Americans. The British are comfy and cozy in New York, while the Hessians are watching Washington and the Continental Army across the Delaware River, who are in a terrible condition. In order for the revolution to continue, something has to change. But just in time for Christmas, people seem to find themselves in agreement. A colonel, Joseph Reed, writes to Washington on December 22nd, and his letter captures the situation that they are in. Quote, "We are all of the opinion, my dear General, that something must be attempted to revive our expiring credit, give our cause some degree of reputation, and prevent a total depreciation of the continental money which is coming on very fast. That even a failure cannot be more fatal than to remain in our present situation. In short, some enterprise must be undertaken in our present circumstances, or we must give up the cause." End quote. In the letter, Reed goes on to point to Trenton as a place to attack. Washington agrees. They need a victory. And what better day than Christmas to execute the plan? There are only 1,500 Hessians in Trenton. They are led by a man named Johann Raw. It is not a force meant to confront Washington all winter. Rather, it's there to keep an eye on him. Washington knows people are watching, so his plan is to leave on Christmas night, 1776, under the cover of darkness. They have to catch the Hessians by surprise to minimize losses and keep them from retreating. 3 groups are going to cross at different parts of the Delaware River. Washington will lead the largest group of 2,400 men. They will cross the Delaware River from Pennsylvania into New Jersey using mostly Durham boats at McConkey's Ferry, about 9 miles north of Trenton. Then the army will march in 2 rows south to Trenton to attack the Hessians. The plan is to finish crossing before midnight and make it to Trenton on foot before sunrise on December 26th, hopefully while the Hessians are still sleeping. The second and third groups are smaller. Both groups intend to cross the Delaware south of Trenton. So when the larger force, led by Washington, attacks, any retreat to the south will be met with those reinforcements. This is probably the most famous part of the story, the crossing of the Delaware. It didn't exactly look like Emanuel Lutz's picture, but it's close enough. Large ice flows in the river, like the picture shows, are present. They need to be pushed out of the way and dodged. Colonel Henry Knox, later our first Secretary of War, wrote of the experience, quote, "The floating ice in the river made the labor almost incredible. However, perseverance accomplished what at first seemed impossible." End quote. Washington definitely wasn't standing. In a moment of levity, he actually makes a joke. I don't usually picture Washington as funny, but when getting in the boat, Knox is in his way. The general says, quote, "Shift that fat ass, Harry, but slowly, or you'll swamp the damn boat." End quote. The line reportedly gave the men quite a chuckle, which is good because one thing the painting does not show is the weather. There was a nor'easter that night. Freezing rain drenched the soldiers and the Delaware River swelled to be 1,000 feet wide. No one knows for sure how many boats the Army had at their disposal, but they ferried 2,400 soldiers, 200 horses, and 18 cannons across the icy river. Not surprisingly, the conditions made it so they had to run late. They wanted to be done by midnight. They finished at 3 a.m. and don't get on the march until 4. Further, the weather was so bad that the 2 parties crossing the south failed to do so. When the Continental Army was to attack Trenton, they would do so with no reinforcement. Washington did know before this crossing started that there was a possibility those armies to the south weren't going to be able to cross. It's not like today where we have means to actually message people miles away of that kind of thing, so we had to plan for that. Now, to start out this entire mission, the resolve in Washington's mind was solid. He was going to go through with this no matter what. One good example is the password that's going to be used for the trip. Anyone joining the group had to use the phrase, "victory or death." And that's a good example of what was going on here. Not going through with the attack wasn't an option. Back to Washington's army. At this point, these soldiers have been outside for at least 5 hours. It's freezing, they're wet, and now they need to march 9 miles to Trenton. They set 2 columns of soldiers, and they start heading south. As they do, Washington rides on horseback, urging his men to keep up and stay with their officers, which is important in dark and near whiteout conditions. Elijah Bostwick, a soldier in the Continental Army, explains what it was like. Quote, "Our march began with the torches of our field pieces stuck in the exalters. They sparked and blazed in the storm all night." End quote. Of the weather, Captain Thomas Rodney wrote, "It was as severe a night as I ever saw, with this storm of wind, hail, rain, and snow." In another example of resolve, Washington at one point is informed that the muskets of many of his soldiers may have become too wet to fire. Washington responds to his officers, "Use the bayonet, for the town must be taken." 2 troops fall behind due to fatigue and cold. They freeze to death behind the army. The rest of the troops arrive at Trenton an hour after sunrise at 8 a.m. At Trenton, Washington split his force. Major General Nathaniel Greene leads one column in an attack to the north, while Major General Sullivan leads the other. He attacks from the west and cuts off any possible retreat to the south. In the first major break that the Americans have gotten, and the most important one, Rahl and the Hessians are taken completely by surprise. Most Hessians wake up to cannon and gunfire. The battle is a one-sided rout, with the Hessians never fully able to gather themselves as they are herded into position by the Americans. Some Hessians manage to escape, but most are captured and their leader, Johann Rahl, is mortally wounded. Just over 100 Hessians are killed or wounded, and around 900 are captured. There are no American deaths, except for the 2 men who froze to death. It's an incredibly successful victory for the Americans. But how were these Hessians, professional soldiers, caught off guard? There have always been rumors that the Hessians did a little too much hard liquor Christmas celebrating, but most historians do reject that idea. Sadly, because it is more fun. The Continental Army did find lots of rum in Trenton after the battle, and Washington had a very hard time convincing his men not to consume it. A more likely scenario for the Hessian failure than drunkenness is likely a combination of intelligence and just the conditions. Both the British and the Americans were trying to convince the Hessians that the Americans were no real threat prior to the battle, although for different reasons. An American spy, pretending to be a loyalist, Abraham Hunt, reported to Rall that the Americans were in far too terrible a condition to fight. But Rall had previously expressed some concern to British leadership about possible attacks. British General James Grant wrote Rall several times in order to reassure him. In one letter Grant wrote to Rall on December 17th, he said, quote, "I can hardly believe that Washington would venture at this season of the year to pass the Delaware at McConkey's Ferry, as the repassing it may on account of the ice become difficult." End quote. It was difficult, but Washington did it anyway. Grant wrote Rall again on December 21st, describing the Continental Army as, quote, "almost naked, dying of cold, without blankets, and very ill supplied with provisions. They have not 300 men." End quote. And Grant, to his credit, at least in the last letter, was not that far off. When he says the Americans don't have but 300 men, he doesn't mean total, he means men in fighting condition. There was a lot of sickness going on in the American camp in conjunction with the lack of supplies. But those conditions in the moment didn't really matter. The American cause in the Revolution demanded it. And the victory, in all likelihood, saved Washington's job. The Battle of Trenton and the follow-up victory in Princeton will make it so that the cause for liberty was saved, at least for the moment, and the vast majority of the men will re-enlist and continue to fight. Some might even call it a Christmas miracle, much like Die Hard, but in reverse, with the plucky Americans attacking the unsuspecting Germans and not the other way around. We're going to wrap this up, but not without a little Thomas Paine. His pamphlet, The American Crisis, was published on December 19th, 1776. There was always the rumor that it had been made mandatory reading for soldiers prior to the Battle of Trenton. That's almost definitely not true, but there was a good chance a good bit of the leadership read it, and it does a good job explaining why something like this was so crucial. Paine writes, quote, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves all the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." End quote. Merry Christmas. Thanks for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it and you come back to check out some of the other ones on the channel. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future videos, please send them in, and we'll hopefully get to all those.